Hello, and welcome to The Black Ponder. I'm the host of the show, Neil Trotter, and in this video, we're going to revisit, if you've been watching the channel for a while, or if you're new, visit the topic of social justice. But this is a philosophy channel, so we're going to do some critical theory on social justice issues. So that's a common theme here on the channel, and we're going to be doing it via this work here. Let This Radicalize You by Kelly Hayes and Mariame Kaba. Right? Let me even read you the subtitle. It is Organizing and the Revolution of Reciprocal Care. So the authors, Kelly Hayes and Mariame Kaba, are OG social justice warriors. Now, I know that's quite the buzzword, and I'm sure, unfortunately, there's probably people that just clicked away from the video or closed or pushed the stop button when they just heard that word, right? But, I think it's an important issue when we talk about, the things that are challenging humanity, whether it be environmental justice, climate change, or things like police brutality, social justice, for particularly racial justice, racial inequity, or things like the diminishing middle class, the increasing inaccessibility of a living wage, the ability to afford basic necessities, right? Like housing, for instance, social economic justice. These things are the bane of human existence, right? Currently at this point in time, and it's quite useful to utilize the tool of philosophy to try and address these issues, right? Because a lot of these issues, whether we want to admit it or not, are issues of philosophy. They're philosophical problems, but also, of course, how we address these issues also has to do with practicality, action, actually going out and doing things, not just sitting in a nice cozy chair, reclining on the armchair and being an armchair philosopher, but doing the work, right? Which is what this is about, right? But also understanding that there needs to be kind of a mindset change, like a shift in perspective of the mind, right? This is kind of, that's where it first starts, right? And so this book is about hey, if you want to start getting involved in activism, let these OG social justice warriors impart with some advice to you, right? And it's a great book. It's a great book. Now, of course, with the Black Ponder, we do not do book summaries, right? We don't cover all the topics of the book, because that, my videos are long enough as they are. But what I like to do is I like to point out themes and kind of pop up as I read the book that I feel are very important, and then discuss those themes, and then use the text, quotes from the book to highlight those themes, and then further have a discussion about these topics, and then also add a supplementary commentary on the comment section below. That's how we roll here on the Black Ponder. So what's the theme that I want to focus on? Well, have you heard of the critique on society now? We're living in this post-fact world, right? We're living in a post-truth society, right? Or scientific research and scientific data is not relevant anymore. People don't put a lot of stock into that. Expert opinion is untrustworthy nowadays, right? You give people the facts, you give people the evidence, climate change is real because of all the scientific research that's been done. Or, take, for example, the abortion issue, where actually sociological and socioeconomic research shows that if you ban abortion, more children will die, actually. Or and then you're putting more mothers at risk when you do that. These kinds of things are you look at the criminal justice system, and actually, the more money you put into our current criminal justice system, the less safety that actually occurs in society, right? I mean, there's all this data that shows these kinds of things. But apparently, like, there's lots of people who are just not swayed by these facts, right? Or this evidence or this research. So what's the deal with that? Why is that happening? Is it just, do we go to this position of, natural selection, social Darwinism type of theory where it's like, well, stupid people are going to be stupid. So that's that. Oh, well, I guess humanity's not smart enough to, get itself out of the destruction that it caused on its own accord. I guess that's just how stupid we are. You start getting into these mindsets of nihilism or nihilism, however you want to pronounce that. Modes of ambivalence, like, oh, well, fuck it. We're all going to die anyway. But this book addresses that reality, that concern, or that area of human nature. And that's what I want to talk about today using this book. So let's begin with some quotes. I'm going to read from the book here. That's what we do here at the Black Ponder. We actually read from the text, in case you're new. Novel, isn't it? Whoa, it's a book channel that actually reads from the book. That's how we roll. But we're going to also have a lot of our own discussion too. We're not just doing like an audiobook thing. But let me read you this quote. And in case you have this book, this is page 19 at the very bottom. That's where I'm starting. Facts are not enough to mobilize people into action. Right? That's what we said. And I skipped to page 21. Fourth paragraph. When a fact or set of facts prompts people to change course, it's usually because someone or something has interrupted the narrative they knew and told a story that feels more true, one worth making changes over. So facts do make people change, but facts don't always do that. So what else is happening when people do change when they hear facts, as opposed to when they don't change and they hear facts? What's going on here? The authors here talk about something has interrupted the narrative they knew, right? The facts tell a story that they feel is more true. So I skip a paragraph. When these narrative shifts occur among communities and groups of people, new potentials arise. People are capable of taking actions that defy systems of oppression and popular expectations. But to ready people for such movements, we must do more than raise the alarm about injustice. So people are swayed by facts, but you need to give them more than just the facts, right? You can't just say climate change is destroying the planet. Just do something about it. It's like, well, what does that mean in the grand scheme? Like, okay, we're going to be destroyed. Uh-oh. I guess we're effed, right? But there needs to be like a more inclusive narrative that is presented on top of that. So let me skip to page 23, second paragraph, third line. Everything is a story, and people need to understand themselves as having a meaningful role within the story you, as an organizer, are telling. So when the authors are saying organizer, they talk about, what this book is about. Like, this book is like an intro to activist organizing, right? So it's like, if you want to be an activist organizer, right, these are the things that you need to consider. So as an organizer are telling. If their role in your story feels like doom appreciator, right? Climate change is going to destroy everything. We're doomed. Like it's over, right? You're just like emphasizing the doomness, the doom scenario, and that's it. Right? Most people will recoil, retreat to their own smaller story, and keep the focus there. That fight or flight response. When you say like our criminal justice system is not working, innocent people are dying, are being incarcerated, the society is not becoming safer. It's a horrible situation, right? Or whatever other scenario you want to talk about. Like, our economy is going down the drain, right? More and more people can't afford housing. People are being drowned in debt. This is horrible. We got to do something about this. But as an organizer, as somebody who's into activism, you can't just like talk about the negative facts, right? The facts that just highlight like the problem. You got to start getting into like, okay, how can I be enabled, or how can I enable you to make the world better? Because we can make the world better. That is a possibility that could happen. And this affects you, and you as an individual acting with other individuals. When you team up into a community of people who want to make a change for the better, that can happen, right? And when you do that, it actually, like, you can create meaningful change for not only the world, but for you and your community, because we're all interconnected. So the key thing is focusing on, okay, how does this problem affect you on an individual or local level? Climate change, for instance. For example, like, okay, what is going on in your community, right, that you see climate change affecting? Whether it's like, damn, it's just too damn hot. It's like 120 degrees outside. Like, and a lot of this is due to the fact that it's all a lot of concrete on the ground, right? And the concrete is absorbing the heat, and then it just releases the heat in nighttime, and it's just it's like an oven, right? Where did all the parks go? Like, where did all the community spaces with all the foliage and the trees and the ground that's like not concrete? Why are they shutting down? We need to like try and get more parks in here. I remember when I was a little kid, they had more parks, but then they bulldozed it down or whatever, and they made room for concrete malls and things like that. And then now it's becoming like, okay, maybe we need to maybe we can make a little park, right, where people can cool off, get some shade. That place over there that's like been bought out by the city and they don't use it, and it's like this large land of grass. And I'm actually talking about things that I witness in my community. Like, there are these large places of just kind of unkempt grassland that's like private, for instance, or like the city owns it, or some real estate agent or real estate corporation owns it, but they're just kind of sitting on it waiting to like for the right time to develop like more commercial real estate or whatever. That would be a great place to create an environment where we could cool off a little bit. It's not being used. Like, let's push back a little bit and say like, hey, why don't we use this for some community service? I live right next to this place, or such and so lives right next to the place. But you see what I'm saying? It's like I'm now beginning to personalize the problem, right? It's not this grand, super massive, super general, like doom and gloom scenario. It's like, okay, there's this issue, whether it's this environmental issue, but I can see direct ways to change it in my community that'll help. Let's get started. Let's do the work. So let me read you this quote. Is from page 36. It's the second paragraph. Organizers must work to construct anchors that can provide a coherent understanding of the world in catastrophic times and help people maintain their values and commitments. If we do not take the work of anchoring seriously, we may find that our ships scatter or even sink with every strong gust of wind. Anchors can take numerous shapes: a story, a community space, a sense of fellowship, a memorial, anything that helps ground people in a shared sense of history, compassion, and purpose. Projects and actions that anchor us awaken compassion, enliven our connectedness, reinforce our values, and when necessary, reorient our political focus. Anchors like that large piece of land that has been bought out by the city and they don't keep it up, and nobody, there's maybe a big trespassing sign, no trespassing, but it's like, hey, that could be a park. And instead of burning our butts off on the concrete, that could be a place, a safe haven for like when it gets extremely hot. There are many things like a community center, right? Maybe the community center closed down in my city. There are several, right? And they're just kind of like abandoned buildings now. And it's like, hey, remember when that community center used to be open and we used to chill and, we were able to do things and keep us busy and do things that were constructive. And, people didn't really resort to crime as much back then because they had these centers that they could go to just chill out and relax and play, basketball or whatever, right? Or do their arts and crafts, Maybe let's try and get that back up and running, because the community center has its history. It has this connection with the community. It fostered like friendships, for example, like, that community center over there. I met you at that community center. Like, that's where we first hung out, right? So you have this kind of story, this narrative. It is these anchors, right, that really can kick off activism, right? And to address these really overarching doom and gloom realities, like crime is like a huge issue that's like really affecting a lot of people. What are we gonna do about this crime? It's just like we give the police more money, but then it's just homicides is still rising, right? Let's focus on our anchors. And here is page 38, second paragraph. Effective organizing, therefore, does not begin with having the most compelling argument or the most dazzling direct action, but with developing the capacity to bring people into relationship with one another, such that they might begin to overcome alienation and fear. It's not really effective to scare people into acting. Like, oh my God, in the year 2050, like the world will be so hot that there will be places that will be unlivable that used to be livable. Isn't that horrible? Like, we need to act. That's just gonna scare people. The fight or flight response is gonna be like, okay, I don't even want to deal with that. I don't even think about it. I'm not even. Or, so that's the flight. Or the fight, they'll be like, why are you bringing that up, man? Like, I don't need to, people start getting apprehensive to you about that. Like, come on, man. Don't bring that shit, that stuff up, man. I'm just trying to live, Instead, doing it that way. This is where the whole thing about, like, you present people with facts, and it's like, well, that didn't really help, or like, that didn't really make me want to change, because it's just doom and gloom, right? So it's got to be more than facts, right? So this is page 40, second paragraph. Another crucial anchor for organizing is carefully constructed political education. This element is especially important as we work to confront our fears, okay? Creating space for people to come to grips with disturbing truths and grapple with them in collectivity helps us build braver communities, where people find strength and inspiration in one another. As activists, we sometimes poke holes in people's worldviews, perhaps damaging assumptions or allegiances, and this can feel satisfying. But a deeper kind of education is needed to uproot fear and spur action. The more difficult work begins when a person must reconfigure or replace their damaged or delegitimized worldview. If you leave them to it, they may find ways to patch over the holes you poked in their old point of view and rebuild something similar. Take, for example, the abortion issue, where, somebody's like, I believe abortion's murder, right? And then, you bring up the fact that, if you look at like research that's done, like communities and societies that like ban abortion access, they actually have higher mortality, infant mortality rates, right? So if your goal is to decrease infant mortality rates, banning abortion is actually going to go against what you are trying to fight for, right? You say this, and then a lot of people who have that belief will still say, well, I still believe it because this, and this. They'll start like patching the holes, and it's like, because you didn't really get at the heart of the matter, right? Or like you didn't really include them in this narrative of life. Like you're just kind of just throwing them holes. And you know, sometimes that'll make you feel good, like, haha, I found a little hole, or like I found a contradiction, or you know, I found a little a plot twist in your story. But it's like that, you know, that kind of thing doesn't really work to change minds. Anyone can tell someone who is wrong that they are mistaken. Organizers go farther, welcoming people into the practice of envisioning and enacting change. As old worldviews fall away, new worlds must be built. Part of our work is helping people understand the world on a new set of terms, a framework in which the social dynamics of capitalism are spelled out in gritty, honest terms, but also understood as malleable, impermanent, and breakable. Imagining how the world ought to be, and then fighting and rehearsing for that world, demands a great deal of the human psyche. People need new transformative stories to embrace in place of the false narratives they must let go, or that are being ripped out from under them. They may need to reimagine what the fulfillment of their values look like, or even reimagine their values. All right. So, you know, so when you take away somebody's worldview, like abortion is murder, and it's like, no, it's not, and then you like give them like these facts, scientific facts. Okay, now their world is destroyed, but it's like you gotta like give them something to go off of, right? Or else they have nothing. Like you can't just break down their point of view and then just leave them hanging, right? They're just gonna cling back to their old views, or just reconstruct something new, because they have to reconstruct something to move forward, right? But that reconstruction might just reiterate what they're already thought beforehand, right? You know, take for example abortion. I would say, like, you know, one of the things I've said in several of my videos about the topic was like, look, I'm a Christian too, which is true. And, you know, let's think about this. Let's think about the theological position of an unborn baby dying in like the uterus, right? And, you know, you talk about like, okay, what is sentience? You know, what is like self-awareness? When does it actually begin? When does consciousness happen? And like, when does a soul actually like develop, right? Does it develop when the moment of conception? Where does it say that in the Bible, right? Where is that being said? And you know, you talk it through, and that's a whole other discussion, which we've had in several other videos. But what I'm doing right now is I'm kind of more relating to the person. Not, you know, so much on their terms, like on their level. I kind of am, because we're both Christians, but more to the point, like I'm including their narrative into the issue, right? Okay, you have this Christian narrative. I also have this Christian narrative and let's like examine our story. You know, question like, okay, where did this actually belief come from, right? Why do you believe this? Where is it coming from, right? And how is this belief really helping your point of view? Like, you know, let's really examine that, right? And so that's like a philosophical examination, and that's why I'm all about like, yeah, philosophy. That's like a highly underutilized tool that can really help address a lot of these social economic problems which we as human beings face, that are very profound, right? But you know, when we start including people as narratives in this story of how do we address these issues, right? That's when you're gonna have to start applying philosophy. Okay, so this is page 47. This is the second to last paragraph. This is the fifth line. Movements are based on oppressed people coming together because we have people power. So we need people for the people power, right? Meaning like we gotta start coming together, right? It's very difficult to make change when we're all just arguing with each other, right? And so by doing that, we have to really start including and taking into considerations other people's stories and narratives, and kind of seeing how they interconnect and interrelate with our own stories, right? Our own narratives. However, building people power is not simply about adding people to fill in gaps in our work. Rather than recruiting people to fulfill the roles that we envision for them, The importance of learning what people are passionate about and finding an intersection, right? Whether that's like religion, right? With the Christianity, what I'm saying is like, well, let's look at Christianity from this other point of view, right? And see really how God plays into the whole abortion thing. Like when you really start to examine that, and that could be their interest, right? And we're not trying to like manipulate people's minds or like, yeah, I can do this like mental gymnastic trickery and right? Like let's say you generally don't believe in like a religion and you're just like, well, I can I can know a lot about the religion and then I can flip it on you. Like, no, like I'm not saying that. I'm saying like, okay, we genuinely believe this shared religion, but something is wrong, right? When you do this ban on abortion, for example, more children are dying. So, and that's not what God wants, right? So like, what's going on here, right? Like, let's really deeply have this talk where we both share each other's ideas. So the importance of learning what people are passionate about and finding an intersection, okay, between someone's interests and the work at hand. Relationship building is also a process of hearing what people's needs and dreams are and creating space for people to collaboratively or collectively take care of each other. Giving space for people to do that. So what are you good at, right? What are your interests? What are you interested in? Okay, how can you use your interests or what you're good at to help the overall problem, right? Not just the whole like, this is the problem, right? This is the problem. It's like, okay, but what about how do we do solutions, right? And each person is gonna provide solutions in their own special way. There's like not one solution, right? You need that interconnected, interwoven, like very diverse set of solutions to solve these massive problems. So you want to allow people to like write their own narratives, because as the book is saying, like story is like how human beings interpret the world. We're not like machines, right? We're not like software or hardware, right? We don't just interpret the world on figures and facts and numbers and like binary ones and zeros, right? We're not artificial intelligence, we're not AI. Like that's what AI does, right? We process the world through stories and narratives, right? And further to that, we process the world on how we ourselves are included in the story, right? We see ourselves as characters in the story, right? So as a character in this story, what am I doing, right? How am I a part of this story, right? And that's how we interpret the world, all right? That's how we make sense of the world. So if you're trying to organize people in progressive and constructive ways to act to solve problems, then you need to enable them to write themselves into the story of life or the story of what you're trying to do, right? But they need to be authors too, right? They need to be able to write themselves into the story, right? You don't write them a story for them, and you don't write their narrative. They are writers of their own narrative, and you gotta let them write their narrative into the story that you're telling, right? And then they feel like, oh, I'm the main character, and this is how we interpret reality. I do want to emphasize, like, we're not trying to manipulate people and we're not trying to trick people. Like, yeah, I'm gonna construct this story and then you're gonna be like duped into thinking like you're part of this grand scheme that I'm developing. Like people do that too, right? That's kind of like the dark side of this way of organizing, or con artists and pyramid schemes and all this. So it's an effective strategy, but what makes it progressive and good and moral and ethical, right, and actually like constructive, right, is the ability to allow that person to write their own story, their own narrative in the grand story, right? And just letting people being authors of how they can make change. And what is that really? That's autonomy, that's freedom, right? People need to be free to contribute to how they want to change the world. So you got to enable that for them as an organizer. Okay, so this is page 87, second paragraph. When we pursue information in an extractive manner, Diving for facts rather than immersing ourselves in histories and ideas and engaging with them imaginatively, we often miss the larger stories and undercurrents and motivations that give history its context. Those larger contexts contain many precious lessons that the powerful have worked hard to erase. For example, we talk about crime and the problems of the criminal justice system. We need to really consider the historical context of the criminal justice system. For example, if you think about the history of policing in the United States of America, right, when police were first created in the United States, the police force was a force of slave management. They were the ones that made sure slaves were kept in line, and if they ran away, the police would come and gather them, and they kept slaves under control. Back when police were first started in the United States, they did that, and then where slavery was illegal in the northern states, their primary function was busting unions, labor unions. That was what they did, right? That's their historical foundation. And so you can see that historical base still being implemented or carried out to this day, even though we see police are policing as something else, these are people that provide safety, but you're still seeing echoes of that, strong echoes of their historical origin, right? Because most people that deal with the criminal justice system are people of color, and they're poor people, right? And when you talk about slaves and who are Black Americans, as well as poor people who are busting those labor unions to make sure the high rich people got their needs met, right? You can still see the historical context, so that's important to consider, right? Same thing with when I bring the example with the abortion argument. You look at religious, the historical context of religion, particularly Christianity, and you look at the Bible as a historical document, you'll see all types of curation and censorship of certain books that were taken out, or different various editions that were created by people in power, and these were all done to serve the interests of those in power, right? Or serve historical, social, economic interests. So the point is you're beginning to look at not just the facts, right? You're starting to look at the historical context, which is a story, right? You're starting to see the story of history unfold, and then it makes more sense, right? And then you see how, okay, this is how this story affects my narrative, right? And that's what the authors, want you to consider when you organize. You need to remind people of the historical context, the story, how the past influences the current times and how that will go into the future. As you and me are characters in this whole story, this historical story. Okay, so this is page 105, and this is the second paragraph, third line. Organizers help people understand their own social and historical position in relation to other people, which means reframing their own history and the histories they know in relation to other histories and experiences. When we organize people, we are inviting them to relate to others. We are also reminding them, or perhaps even telling them for the first time, that their fate, their liberation, and their particular social concerns do not exist in any kind of singularity. Individualism has programmed people to view our fates and histories as divided. Movement education is, in part, a deprogramming process. It is a path toward unlearning mythologies and liberating ourselves from the isolation of individualism and enclosed narratives. So, when we talk about effective activism, effective organizing, we're talking about kind of educating people, right? Movement education is how it's referred to in the book. We're telling people about the story of society, right? Because, society just didn't arise out of nothing. the society is the way that it is because of historical things that have happened. And we all play a role in that. We all are in the positions that we are because of those historical events that happen in our society, right? We're all interconnected and interrelated. And even the point where a lot of our beliefs are influenced by the stories that we're told, by the stories that have happened in history. And so the cool thing about that is we're part of that story, and we're characters in that story, and we all have narratives. And so we can change, we can act, we can make meaningful influence. Because that's what characters in stories do. Well, the good characters, they were all, the cool characters, we're the main characters. That's what the organizer is doing. And this is all like the truth, right? As I said before, like that's how we interpret reality, is through like storytelling and narrative construction, right? And this is how we're like different from AI. This is why artificial intelligence is not the same thing as human intelligence, because we interpret reality through like stories, right? And we see ourselves as narratives, as characters in events that play out. And stories, how they happen, how they play out, is through character development, right? And so like that's just something an organizer should highlight. Like, look, you can make a change. Like, let's look at the world around us. Even the local world around us, our local communities, and you see how these things are changing, and we see like kind of the bad stuff that are changing. Whether, like we were saying before, community center closed down, a school is like underfunded. There's a lack of resources. The grocery store is going out of business. It's like these are things that directly relate to the problems that we're facing. These grand problems, whether it's like crime is like on the rise, even climate change is an issue now. I mean, they're all based off of local problems, right? And so you can change that. And so in that way, we go beyond just the facts and the statistics and the data. Not saying that that's not important, like facts, data, statistics, science, expert opinion. I think those are very important, and there definitely should be major influences in our decisions. I think so. I believe science is important, but that's not the only thing that's going to sway people, because like we're saying, we're not machines, right? We're humans. And that's how you sway humans, through a meaningful possibility, capability, through their ability to see themselves as an active agent in the story of life, right? And really, what is that? Really, it's freedom, it's free will, right? It's agency, it's autonomy, right? So, I'm like a believer in free will, and I think like, even if it's just a perception or like it isn't like ultimate free will, but it's like an experience that we have in our minds, it's still real, and it still like impacts our motivation to do things, right? Because we also have the sensation that we have no power, like we can't do anything. That's a lack of will, free will, right? When you're like, I can't do anything about this, it's too big, right? When you get into that mode, it doesn't matter how many facts or figures you throw at somebody. It's like, well, you're telling me all this stuff, but it doesn't matter, because what could I do? But as an organizer and activist, your job is to remind people like you can do something about it. Free will is the thing that you have, and you just you gotta focus on the things that are part of your story. And because we're all interconnected and we're all interrelated, individualism is just a social construct that ultimately also doesn't exist. We're all interdependent. So by you focusing on your story and doing great things within your context of the narrative of you can have direct impact on the world, because we're all like this network of beings influencing each other. And that's all I wanted to say. Well, I wanted to bring up about this book in this video. Great book, Let This Radicalize You by Kelly Hayes and Mariame Kaba. Okay, I'd done a video on this author before with her book. It's called We Do This Till We Free Us. Check out that video if you wish. And I would also encourage you to check out this book. Well, you've been watching The Black Ponder. Tune in next time for more philosophical thought.